All right, hello everybody and welcome back. Our lecture today is going to be the first one in Unit 8. This unit, we're going to be talking about what happens after World War II. And it's really going to focus on this next war that happens before World War II is even over, called the Cold War. So make sure right now you write your heading, and then please don't forget to write the essential question: what was the Cold War and how did it begin? This picture right here is of a little German boy in Berlin watching an American plane go by over these trees as part of the Berlin airlifts. All right, so let's recall what has just happened. In the 1930s, we had failed, and the world community, the League of Nations, had failed to stop the rise of totalitarian dictators that had, like Hitler, Mussolini, Tojo, that had led to World War II. After we defeat these evil dictators and take down the Axis powers in World War II, we viewed these past policies like isolationism as a mistake, okay? We had kept out of European affairs. We had kept out of the League of Nations. We had refused to ratify the Treaty of Versailles. After World War I, America had totally cut itself off. That is called isolationism. And what that had allowed was for these evil, terrible men like Hitler to rise to power. So we saw what we had done as a mistake. It allowed true evil to rise up because we had stayed out. So we needed to be more involved. We knew this. And so after World War II, we're going to be sure not to make the same mistake. We're going to take a very proactive role in trying to keep the world free and keep it safe. We're not going to be isolationist. And here's some of those Dr. Seuss, cartoons that were pointing out the dangers to American neutrality and American isolationism that allowed for World War II. Here again, you can see like America sitting in this tree, drawn by Dr. Seuss. And here's the Nazi woodpecker. It's taken out all these countries like Norway and France. It's destroyed all those places. And it's taking out England right there. And Dr. Seuss is saying, once it's destroyed England, then we're going to be next. We're going to be the next country that's taken over. We can't allow this to happen. We can't afford to stay neutral. Same thing here. Dr. Seuss showing him, Uncle Sam, the United States, sitting pretty in this bed. And then over here, you have all of these terrible dictators in Europe. This is the Atlantic Ocean between us. You can see it's not that far between Europe and us, and these terrible dictators taking over places in Europe and killing people. Eventually, it's going to spread over to here, and we're going to have to deal with it too. So our neutrality, our isolationism had been a mistake. We need to be more involved, especially considering with what was going on. So remember, at the end of World War II in Europe, at the Yalta Conference at the beginning of 1945, at the Potsdam Conference in July of 1945, with Truman and Stalin and Churchill and stuff. At these conferences, we were increasingly dealing with the Soviet Union, with Joseph Stalin, who was saying one thing to our faces, but in reality was doing something else. He told us at these meetings that he had no interest in keeping his armies in Eastern Europe and keeping those places. But yet what had happened is, as the Red Army had marched through Eastern Europe, on their way to Berlin, because it was the Russians that got to Hitler first, right? It was the Russians that found his burnt corpse. It was the Russians that had the evidence there. It was the Russians that got there first before us. As they went through Eastern Europe and they liberated those death camps of the Holocaust and stuff in Poland, they kind of just hanged on. They kind of just kept a lot of those places. The Red Army never really left these Eastern European countries. They're going to occupy them. And he was supposed to leave them, but who's going to stop Stalin? Who's going to kick him out? At the end of World War II, it's really only the United States and the Soviet Union that are the only two superpowers left standing. And we weren't about to go and start World War III after not even barely having finished World War II. And so there's nobody to stop Stalin from taking these places in Eastern Europe, and that's what he's going to do. Out of these Eastern European nations, like Poland and Romania and Bulgaria and Hungary and Slovakia, the Czech Republic and Eastern Germany, because remember, Germany will be divided at the Yalta Conference. These Eastern European nations you see in light red are going to become what will be called the satellite nations, okay? These are like, you know, satellites orbit the planet. The gravitational pull of Earth keeps these satellites in our orbit. These satellite nations orbit the Soviet Union. They are trapped by and kept as part of the Soviet Union. Now, the nations of Eastern Europe you see here, from Estonia down to Ukraine to Moldova, down to Georgia here, these Eastern European nations in dark red, those are going to actually become part of the Soviet Union itself. They will be completely annexed or like taken over. All right. And yeah, you could say when Stalin, like look here in this cartoon, Stalin's stretching over Eastern Europe, he's taken all these places, right? You could say when Stalin refuses to give up Eastern Europe, you know, he's being just as bad as Hitler, as the guy we just defeated. You know, we were with the Soviets, we were with Stalin to defeat the Nazis, but now Hitler's gone. And now that, you know, there's no more enemy for us to fight, now we're kind of enemies, because the whole reason that we had been allies with the Soviet Union to begin with is because we had a common enemy. It's that old saying, right? That the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And what happens when you defeat your common enemy? Here's a picture of the Soviet soldier raising the Soviet flag over Berlin as the Red Army takes Hitler's capital in Germany. Remember, they got to Berlin first. And so this is what it's looking like, okay? You have this divide happening in Europe between Western Europe, you know, places like England and France and Italy and all these places. Western Europe is going to be free. It's going to be, you know, partially rebuilt by the United States. We're going to be looking after it. And then Eastern Europe is going to be communist. It's going to be these places that are either going to be satellite nations of the Soviet Union or completely annexed as part of the Soviet Union. Now, this question's asking, why do you think the Soviet Union would benefit from gaining control of Greece and Turkey? So let's see, Greece right here and Turkey right here, they're still in orange. They're still non-communist. They're still free, in other words. But look at their proximity, how close they are to Russia, to the Soviet Union, okay? Russia is a very cold place. The Baltic Sea in the wintertime on these ports like St. Petersburg, it freezes over. Russia constantly has been wanting throughout history access to warm water ports. It needs access to shipping to places that don't freeze over for half the year. And so it has the Black Sea, but what it really needs is access to the Mediterranean so it can get out to the Atlantic Ocean, so it can spread its power, its navy, its trade. And that is why Greece and Turkey are especially important to Russia right there. And that's why they want to take them over. And this is where our president, Harry Truman, remember Truman's our president at the end of World War II, our president, that our beloved leader, Franklin Roosevelt, FDR, he had died just a few weeks before Hitler had committed suicide in April of 1945. And FDR's last vice president, Harry Truman, had to become president at the end of the war, you know, helped to end the war against the Japanese. Truman was the one who decided to drop the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And now it's Truman who has to decide how we're going to navigate this really tricky situation. You know, we just ended the biggest war in human history. You know, tens of millions of people were killed. Most of the world is hurt and destroyed. And America and Russia are the only two countries that really kind of came out of this with any power. Do we really want to just, you know, start another world war before the last one's even ended? And Truman decides to carve a middle path. Truman does, I think, kind of a really smart thing here. He says, you know, we're not going to go directly to war against the Soviets because nobody wants that. We just ended World War II. We can't do that. But we also can't just let Stalin take over, you know, half of Europe and get away with it and just take over whatever else he wants without trying to stop him. Because then, you know, why did we fight World War II to begin with? Why did all those people in World War II have to die? if not to stop terrible dictators from taking over places and killing people, right? So what Truman's going to do is basically say, no, okay, we're not going to directly fight you, but we're not going to let you take over any more places. So we're going to draw a line, okay? And old Winston Churchill, remember the leader of Great Britain during World War II, never give up, never surrender. Old Winston Churchill, he kind of talks about this line as well. He gives it a name in a speech he gave, where he refers to this line in the sand, this border in Europe that separated the free states, the free countries of Western Europe from the communist nations, the satellite nations of Eastern Europe. He called it the Iron Curtain. An iron curtain has descended across the continent. Don't worry, that's the last time I'll give my terrible Churchill impersonation, okay? But this Iron Curtain, this is the dividing line right here. You can see in red between the free West and the communist East, okay? Where communism is the type of government and economic system of the Soviet Union. America does not like communism because communism, what they have is basically like a dictatorship where everybody is slaves to the government, okay? That is why we do not like communism. All right. And then the last thing I want to talk to you guys about today, we're going to talk about the long telegram and Truman's policy. So Stalin is eyeing Turkey and Greece. He wants those warm water ports. He wants to take over places and continue to expand his Soviet communist empire. And Truman says, no, we're not going to let you do that. Okay. He issues the Truman Doctrine. Okay. And this is our president saying, we're going to stand up to these communists. We're going to oppose Soviet aggression. And in the Truman Doctrine, kind of in the speech that Truman gives about standing up to Stalin and to the communist expansion, he is going to create this new policy that's going to lead us for the next 50 years of American foreign policy. It's a big deal. It's called containment theory. Okay. So how are we going to stop the Soviets without going into all-out warfare? Since we want to avoid that right after ending World War II, we're going to contain communism. Allow it to exist where it already is located. So we're not going to fight the communists in the satellite nations. We're not going to fight them for, Poland or Romania where they've annexed. We're not going to fight them in Russia itself. We're going to let that be. And we're basically going to doom all of those people, the poor Polish people, right? Remember how torn up they were during World War II, and now they're being taken over by the Soviets, by the communists. But they're behind this Iron Curtain. An Iron Curtain, right? You can't see behind iron. It's, it's solid. You can't get behind it. Now that's a metaphor. There wasn't actually like a border wall between the entire continents of, Europe separating East and West. But this metaphor, it did have actually a real wall that existed in East Berlin, I guess you could say. But basically, yeah, they're lost to us. We can't do anything to save them. They're behind the Iron Curtain. All we're going to do in containment policy is we're going to try to keep communism from spreading, okay? Think about like a glass of water. The cup, the glass, that's containing the water. It's not going to allow that water to spill out everywhere, okay? You're going to allow the water to be in the cup. You're not going to mess with the water or spill it out or, do whatever, drink it, okay? This metaphor is getting weird already. But the cup contains it. That water's not going to go anywhere else. That's what we're going to do with containment policy. It was a policy that came about from an American diplomat that had studied and lived in Moscow for many years. He knew the Russians very well, and he sent this long telegram, this cable, back to Truman and to our American government advising for this containment policy. He says, I know Russia. I know if we try to fight directly against them, it's going to be really ugly. So instead, we need to contain the communist threat, not allow it to spread, okay? And this is going to be our policy everywhere in the world for the next 50 years. We're going to try to keep communism from spreading. Sometimes that means offering aid and assistance to places so that they can fight communism on their own. And sometimes that means actually standing up to communism with a military force, okay? But that is the policy of containment. And I'm going to go ahead and stop there. And we will talk about our first challenge with containment policy, trying to stand up to the communist threat just right after World War II was over, in the very capital, the heart of where Adolf Hitler had had his command center, Berlin, Germany. All right, thank you guys for listening. I will talk to you later. Let's see if we can get this to actually